You're listening to Season 2 of the Mies podcast. I'm your host, Josh Sharkey, the founder and CEO of Mies, a culinary operating system for food professionals. On the show, we're going to talk to high performers in the food business, everything from chefs to CEOs, technologists, writers, investors, and more, about how they innovate and operate and how they consistently execute at a high level, day after day. And I would really love it if you could drop us a 5-star review anywhere that you listen to your podcast. That could be Apple, that could be Spotify, it could be Google. I'm not picky. Anywhere works, but I really appreciate the support. And as always, I hope you enjoy the show.
With every stroke of the pencil, I'm giving you folks a glimpse into my experiences.
Today's guest likely needs no introduction. He's one of the most successful chef and restaurateurs in America, Chef Michael Mina. Chef Mina has dozens of restaurants in the U.S. and abroad. He's a 3-time James Beard Award winner, his Michelin stars, 5 Diamond Award, Wine Spectator, the list goes on. I've worked with a ton of chefs who have come through Mina's kitchen, and one of the first things that I think of when I think of Chef Mina is, well, independent of just the overall success and delicious food he creates, is that he's an incredibly systems-driven leader. And he's also a chef that clearly understands the immense value of service and hospitality alongside cooking, right? That it's obviously just important and oftentimes more important to have great service. And it's cool to see that he stands behind that. And even though he is definitely a chef's chef, understands the importance of service. Chef Mina and I took a little time up front to talk about the passing of the late, great chef David Bouley, whom I worked for a couple decades ago. Bouley had passed the day before we recorded this episode. It was just such a tragedy. Really, it was tough. So I found myself just having to talk about it. He was far too young. I think he was 70. And it was really cathartic to take some time to discuss why his impact was so great. And just generally speaking about, what he meant to us as chefs with Chef Michael Mina. Given Chef Mina now has 3 decades under his belt in his career, most of what we discussed today were lessons learned and how he has changed and where he's maybe not changed so much as a leader, as a chef, and an entrepreneur. It's really clear that as much as he loves scaling his business and continuing to build more opportunities for his team, he also has this really deep love of R&D and the menu development process. He's still really hands-on as a chef, which is pretty impressive given how many restaurants he has all over the place that his company operates. Anyways, anyone that is scaling their restaurant business today or is planning to, there's a lot that you can learn from our conversation today. So as always, I hope that you enjoy the conversation as much as I did. Nice to meet you. We haven't met before, which is kind of crazy, but nice to finally meet you, at least somewhat face-to-face. I've heard about you over the years. Cooking in New York back, in the day, we would hear about you, but never really interfaced. We're going to talk about a little bit today because you're finally coming to New York.
That's right.
I think for the audience, I'm not going to bother with a bunch of background because everybody listening here likely knows you. Dozens of restaurants around the world, multiples of dozens. 3 times James Beard Award winner, Michelin stars, 5 Diamond, Wine Spectator. You get it, you know the drill.
Yeah.
I have to ask you, just sort of kicking things off, how does it feel to open it in New York now, finally? Because you started in New York.
Yeah, I did. It's really exciting. I mean, honestly, it's been strategic to have taken the time to not open in New York because, I raised a family, have 2 boys. And
how old?
Well, now they're 22 and 25. And so now they're out of the house and doing their thing. And that was always really kind of that benchmark of saying, when you're open in New York, what type of a commitment that is. And I always said, it's not even really a consideration until the kids were all settled and out of the house and really had the time to do it. And I think from that side, I think that was kind of one of the driving factors. And then I always wanted it to be I wanted it to feel right. And this particular opportunity, just, being at the Essex House, being in Central Park, it really feels like really the right time and the right restaurant concept that I wanted to do there.
Yeah, I'm New York based, and we're all excited.
Thank you.
To see you. A little tangent just for today, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Actually, the first time I heard about you 2 decades ago, I was cooking for Bouley, and you've had a bunch of chefs, obviously, Sarah Rich, who I worked with her husband a lot, and Raj, who's still working with you. Man, I mean, it's great, just personally, Greg Coombs was my mentor for many, many
Yeah.
years, and Floyd Cardoz before that, and Bouley before that. And like in the last 3 years, all three of them have passed away. And I don't know if you knew Bouley, but I'd
Yeah.
love to maybe take a minute to just talk about that because
Yeah. Look, I mean, I think it's really sad. I think it's really something that, like you said, it's been multiple. Unfortunately, now it's been multiple chefs. And obviously our industry is hard. You know, it's very demanding. It's very intense. And I think that there's no doubt about it. But I think that the camaraderie that happens in this industry, and then the respect you have for people with so much talent and that work so hard. I think what kind of what hits people really hard is it's also a lot of people, you're connected with chefs because they're doing something, right? And so if you've eaten at their restaurants or whatever, so a lot of people are connected. I mean, David Bouley is, that's an icon. That's not I had a 3-year run or I had a 5-year run on top. This is a person that, is one of the people that really shaped the industry. Right. And, I was working at Tribeca Grill when, he had Montrachet and I mean, just to even be in a room with him was like, and it hits hard, and then you see, you see the talent that comes. It's really, I think, Josh, I think it's interesting. I think that, sorry, I won't go on a tangent, but I will a little bit just because I think it's really important is like, as a chef, I never got to work in the kitchen besides doing events together, which was, always great. But as far as like, working under David Bouley, I didn't get to have that privilege. I see a Raj Dixit who I worked with for years. And I just see how he conducts himself, how he thinks about food and everything else. And so many times when I ate Chef Bouley's food, I can see exactly like why Raj cooks like that, why his mind works like that. And it's, it really shows like how people like that really have shaped our industry and made the US, you think about the rise in quality of cooking in restaurants in the US. Well, those are the type of people that really started it, pushing everyone to a totally different level, Yeah.
What I think about, and I thought about it a lot more last night too, and it hit me each time, right? I spent the least amount of time with Bouley, actually. I think it was only like 8 months. And I mean, I turned, because I wanted to go work for Kuntz. And I was like dying to, I was waiting for his new restaurant to open. But the thing that you must think about this now, I mean, you've been doing this for 30 years or so, I think.
Yeah.
The thing about chefs that is so different, I think, from so many other industries is that you see the impact that they have because there's so many chefs that came from them. That when something like this happens, and it's a bummer that this only starts to like be talked about when someone passes away.
Sure.
The impact, the number of chefs that came through, Bouley's kitchen, and I mean, is astounding. And same with Kuntz and with Floyd, it's astounding. And the same with with your kitchens. And there's something about being a great chef, independent of making delicious food, where you are able to sort of instill this thing in other chefs that it's somewhat rare,
One of the things that I've really kind of linked together of doing this for many years is like, like everyone wants to give you these people came from your kitchen or you're their mentor or this or this. I'm not a big believer in that in a lot of ways. In a lot of ways, I look at it and say, you look at the relationships that they built with other people in the kitchen. You look at how strong and long those relationships are. And that's where the web really, I think, really starts to take shape is like, it's like a Raj Dixit. I'm going to learn just as much from Raj as he's going to learn from me. But it's more about like, then you start to say, okay, well, when a Raj stays with you for many years and then he influences 10 people and those 10 people influence 10 people and they all keep a very tight relationship. I don't get upset when somebody says, that they worked for me in Washington, D.C. and I only got to spend, X amount of days in a kitchen with them, as long as they went on to do something great, or, built relationships. I think that's where the web gets really exciting and interesting. And I think that like when you talk about a David Bouley or a Greg Kuntz, or I guess what I'm trying to say is it's like-minded people attract each other in a certain way. And then that's how, to me, that's how that flower really grows, right? That's how that plant really grows is yes, you might be the one creating the base foundation for people to get together. But the reality is, I think when it's really meaningful and it really, I think it's really valuable to our industry is when they all build their own relationships together and, and they're all in touch with each other for many years to follow,
Yeah. But it is setting that stage.
100%.
Because look, there's lots of restaurants where we interact with some really great people, but there's not nearly as many where, there's just so many to go through and that sort of compounds on itself. And you're right. Like a lot of times the person I remember most is the sous chef or the 100%. CDC that I was working under, but that's also because it's sort of trickling down, because of the environment that they're in.
Yeah. Yeah. Totally agree.
Something I've been thinking about, just looking at your trajectory of like how much you're building and growing. I'm generally curious about this. There's a decent amount of chefs that have won awards. You won a James Beard pretty early on. You were Best New Chef, a lot of these things, but you could stop there. You could have 1, 2 spots and then do your thing. And you decided to grow this sort of empire. Mm-hmm. Why? And what's driving you to keep building this thing?
I know that it's going to sound cliche and I know that people will say it's the team. It really is in our case. Like the first restaurant was Aqua and I was young. And so the whole group of us kind of did a lot of this together. Like,
how old were you when you were at Aqua?
24. And it, blossomed because of a lot of people. And then the second one happened to be Bellagio. Right. And so and I had worked at Four Seasons in the past while we were building Aqua. I'd worked at Four Seasons. And so I kind of understood that model of like why Four Seasons was special in the sense I learned that early on, like they were special because of a lot of things, but they didn't take on owning these properties. They managed them. And so their real focus was in operations, was in creativity, was in, standards and discipline of the standards and things of that nature. Right. And so when I had a chance to build Mina Group, we really got together, a group of us, and we said, okay, if we're going to grow, let's think about the way that we're going to be able to build the type of restaurants that one, we already operate, that we're very comfortable with, that we can push the envelope. Two, what's going to keep us excited and being able to grow and to partner with hotels. And at that time, hotel dining had started to come back, building really, high quality restaurants back in hotels was starting to come back. We saw it. And so building those partnerships and then being able to do different concepts and partner with other chefs and do things of that nature. That was exciting. I felt like we had a really strong team and I mean a team outside of just the restaurant team, like really strong people, whether it was in HR, whether it was in, marketing or whatever, in the disciplines you need to partner with a hotel, to where we could really focus on operations. We could focus on innovation, design, doing the things that are the part of the job that I'm sure, this as a chef, all of a sudden you think, you think you're a plumber, you think you're an electrician, you think you know how to do everything. The toilet breaks, everyone asks you how to fix it, right? And you realize that you really aren't great at all that, or maybe you are, but it all takes time, right? So where are you going to put your time? And so that's kind of, I think, where the vision started of saying, okay, well, let's build a few restaurants with this vision. And the vision was to do, when I first started Mina Group, the vision was to do 8 restaurants. That was kind of the model. And it was Andre Agassi was my partner. And we set out to do that. And all of a sudden, we kept getting opportunities. And honestly, I had really good talent, people that were ready to be chefs and ready to be general managers and ready to be sommeliers or mixologists. And so just kind of, kept going.
Yeah. Yeah, it's such a great way to be able to have upward mobility for the team. Are the majority of your restaurants, and if you can't answer this, fine, but are the majority of them management contracts, or are there a mix of corporate owned? And
almost all of them. I mean, to this day,
can you tell people why? By the way, can you just maybe tell people why that's such a better model?
Well, I think it's a lot of what I was saying. Like what I've learned over the years is pick your partners, because you got to put a lot of time and effort into picking the right partners. And so I've been really lucky in the sense that my first partner, while it was Bellagio, was bought by MGM. So I was partnered with MGM. That's been an amazing experience because we are able to really focus on running a restaurant. And I think that's the why to me. The why is that you think about like why this business is so stressful, right? Well, a lot of the stress comes from things that actually don't have a lot to do with running your restaurant, right? And so I think if you can put all your creativity, your energy, and the majority of your stress into actually running your restaurant and what's going to affect the guests, and you have these a partnership where you're not worried about, you're not the one that's doing the initial upfront financing. So you're not running around figuring out how to finance the restaurant. You're not that you have an engineering department, you have an HR department, it's really becomes a great team effort. And I think that this wasn't by accident that this has taken off in the United States and that it's helped the quality of food. This isn't by accident that there's a lot of other chefs or restaurateurs partnering in hotels and doing these type of deals, because it's a win for both sides, where you're going to you're bringing something to the hotel that really helps the hotel. And as a chef and as a restaurant group or a restaurant, you're able to focus in on what is really going to affect your staff and your guests the most. While there might be a more profitable way to do it or whatnot, this is the way I think that, is the best for our group. And so that's like, when we veered off of the track, in all honesty, we've seen, there's just not as much enjoyment and pleasure in it.
Yeah. Well, carting and leases are just not normally fun.
No. And, look, we know how to do them because obviously we've had to deal with it. But at this point, it's not what I run out to go figure out, how do I do my next lease? I'd much rather partner. And like I said, I think one of the tricks to it is finding great long-term partners, whether it's the people that own the hotels or whether it's a brand like a MGM or a Four Seasons or a combination of both. Yeah. When you find the right partnerships, if you can do more with them, that's a really nice way to grow together.
Yeah. I have to imagine the things that you're dealing with today are just different from what at least maybe you personally were dealing with 30 years ago. But what's the biggest thing on your plate right now? Like the biggest challenge or stress or hurdle?
I mean, honestly, believe it or not, it actually has stayed fairly consistent over the years in the sense of, my main goal is always to be able to spend a significant amount of time at an opening and be able to be in the kitchen, be able to be in the restaurant. And so I've had to really prioritize my time. Like, I'm not a chef that you're going to find on television a lot. And it's not because I don't believe in it. It's because it actually is a real talent and it takes real effort. Like, the first time I did something on television, I was like, wow, like you actually have to prepare for this. You've got to put real time into this if you want to be good at it. And there's only X amount of time. Right. And to me, it's just important to stay in a rhythm. So the biggest thing that I spend my time on right now, in all honesty, is really being in the restaurants and working on the career pathing. And because, like right now, we put a lot of resources towards learning development and career pathing because, people are learning in a much different way than they used to, in the sense that it's hard. It's going to be a lot harder nowadays to have somebody prep for a year, or be in garde manger for a year or anything like that, right? People want to.
Why do you think that is?
I just think that people want to be able to be rewarded for their knowledge and what they think their knowledge could be. And if they're going to work harder, they want to move up, quicker than they did before. I mean, I'm seeing it all the time. And so like, you've got to kind of keep up with that. If I'm saying it's the only way, I'm a firm believer there isn't only one way to do anything, right? But if you're doing what we're doing, which you have multiple restaurants, you do have to do that. Maybe if you have one kitchen and, like you're going to be there every day and everything else, and people will still, you're going to have a smaller staff. Yeah. But if you want, to have multiple restaurants, or if you have multiple people and you want to use your strengths for us to use our strengths to be the best company we can be and to, be able to build the restaurants we want to build, it is okay, in my opinion, that if people are growing faster, to be able to we got to put the resources towards being able to help them grow and also being able to notice they're growing.
Yeah.
Anybody who's worked in a kitchen knows how frustrating it is if no one notices that you're growing, or if it's just like, it's this set amount of time you need to be here, even though you have the capacity to grow faster than that. And so I think that's something that is important both in front and back of the house. And especially, in front of house now. I mean, you think of the mixology world and you think of, the wine world and the som world, that has been, that's been there for a while, but that knowledge comes at a different pace.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so interesting. Like, I'm so curious, like what it is like today. If you had to start cooking today, as opposed to 30 years ago,
very different.
There's so much more information available.
100%.
Like, I wouldn't be able to Google how to make a Ballantine. Like, you could probably learn exactly how to make it on YouTube right now, and come in and know how to make it. Like, how do you balance that when you have cooks that actually you see potential and you want them to grow? Be like, hey, you kind of need to make that 50 times to know how to really make it. Like, what do you do about that?
So what we do about it, I don't know what everybody does about it. What we do about it is we lean into it really heavy. So like 12 years ago, I think, no, it was more than that. 15 years ago, we started Recipe Exchange. And Recipe Exchange was saying, no, you will never again have to work this long to get this recipe for this soup. From day one, every single thing, we're going to be transparent about everything. Every recipe, every dish, every ingredient to the gram, every technique is going to go up on the site and it's going to be there. And it all, at that time, I think it was 12 restaurants. And I got to be honest with you, I think like 6 chefs quit right? At the same time.
Really?
We launched it. Yeah, because it was either they didn't want to do the digital work or they didn't want to share the recipes, right?
Yeah.
And what we took the approach of is we're going to share every recipe so everybody has everything from day one, whether you're a server, whether you're that whole fear of like, oh, well, people are going to steal your recipes or whatever. Like you just said, it's all out there now, right? It's all out there. So why not organize it in a way where it's the most useful for people so they can learn the fastest? So that, like to me, the biggest reward now is someone to say to me like, oh my God, I worked here, I worked there. Nobody had anything like this, to where I can go if a person wants to spend 8 hours on their own time doing this, they can go do it and learn a lot on our platform. Right. And I think that to me is what you have, that to me was very important for us. And that was actually what COVID helped a lot with, because we got the time to actually, because, when else are you going to get a time where you got all your chefs?
You can't get it done then.
Get to sit around and do this for 2 years, right? So we were able to get a lot done at that time doing it. That's
cool. From afar, what I interpret from looking at your operation is like you're really systems driven. I mean, that means a lot of fucking things. But if you can't have that many restaurants and not create a bunch of systems so that there's consistency, and consistency is basically everything, right? Like customers don't want to come get a different dish next time, the same order. I'm so curious, how do you balance, creating these systems that make sure that you have consistency? To make sure that like everything is consistently executed the same way every time at scale, but then also balance that with like teaching these cooks like the fundamentals of cooking or techniques or independent thinking, even like do you think about how do you where do you sort of like toe the line between this is precisely how you make this thing, and by the way, you don't know that, but that's actually a sauce called Espanol or something,
right? Right. And so I think those are the two questions there. The first one would be, if it's honestly a lot easier if you have less restaurants, right? Because thinking about the systems when it was one restaurant, that was great because you were able to, you didn't have to think about how do they scale, right? You only had to think about how does it work in this restaurant. And so I think that it's really important that if you only have one restaurant, you really are the transparency, I think, is something that you have to, in your stomach, have to feel good about. And I think that different chefs feel different ways about it. Like not everyone feels great about like day one, somebody they might stay with you for 2 weeks and you just gave them all your recipes, right? That's hard, but there's no way there isn't really a way around it, right? If you want to be productive with it, if you want to use it as a tool, you want to use it. And that kind of goes to your second question of, if you give them the information, if you give people the information, if you give Jennifer the information, if you give, anyone the information, right? One, they're going to entrust more in you that you really are helping their career. They're going to probably work harder because they have the information. And there's definitely a way to utilize that to teach them those fundamentals that you're talking about quicker than they would have learned them without the information. And that's the way that I've always looked at it. Is I don't know how long it's going to take for Daniela to learn A, B, or C, right? But the reality is what I'm giving her couldn't be hurting it, right? It's not. It's hopefully going to speed it up,
I think about so sometimes you obviously have to be really prescriptive about like the dish that they're going to make. They might read a recipe that has 200 grams of sherry vinegar and 200 grams of maple syrup and peppercorn, and they're making a gastrique, but they actually don't know it's a gastrique and that they could do 50 other things with that premise of vinegar and something sweet and something, acidic. Like, are there other ways independent of like the recipes where you help them
100%
understand that?
100%. So I think that's where the real part of the kind of that longevity of having a team that has longevity together, because, yes, you're cooking. I mean, kind of called the 2-2-2-2 rule, right? People, a lot of times the last 2 hours, because like they come in and they're there for their 2-hour stage and they're like, okay, I'm never coming back here, because it's just like, there's too much, right? Then it's the first 2 days are really important, right? First 2 days, people are terrified when they go into, it doesn't matter where, like, it's just kind of human nature. It's just, the first 2 days are intense. Then the first 2 weeks, you start talking yourself into what you think, did I make the right decision or not? Right.
Yeah.
And then the first 2 months, you've now talked yourself into it. The first 2 months are, a lot of it is learning, like where do the pots, where do I drop the pots and pans? Where do I do this? Where do I do that? And you're just trying to get through the day. And then after the first 2 months, when you get there, the goal is to get them through 2 years. Cause kind of after a couple of years, now they're part of your team. They really are part of your team. And might be that they go on at that point, but that's kind of, that point where I see like, as it starts to become that decision, do I stay and put in the time here, or do I go work for another great restaurant or whatever else? And I have no issue with it when you do that. I want to see them, if they leave at that point, you want to see them go do something where, one, it's meaningful, but two, where they go, the chefs there are like, wow, this is a good person, this person cares. And so I think, to answer your question, to me, that the tastings every day are really important, and we stay super disciplined with those. And I say to my team all the time, like, if you're the chef or the sous chef or whoever it is, and everyone puts up a tasting of every dish, at 5 o'clock before service, right? Or 4:30, right? And one, it helps them know their station's set. But two, it's your time that you have to interact with them about, okay, this needs more acid. This needs more sweet. This needs more spice. You have to talk to them about what they're cooking and why. And then we do the same thing with all of really like the batch cooking, because as we all know, like, why are recipes so much harder to deal with when you start larger batches, right? Okay, well, the corn is not as sweet, or it's a little sweeter, or this or this. Well, then when you multiply it by 30, because you're making a larger batch, it's multiplied. That flavor profile is multiplied, right? And so when people are batch cooking, I try to really make sure that as they're working on the techniques and everything else, that like as a chef or a sous chef, you got to know when it's really important to spend that time with them to help them along. So they get the wins, honestly, because you need the wins. You definitely need the wins, to get there, to build their confidence.
This show is brought to you by, you guessed it, Mies. Mies helps thousands of restaurants and food service businesses all over the world build profitable menus and scale their business successfully. If you're looking to organize your recipe IP and train your team to put out consistent product every day in less time than ever before, then Mies is just for you. And you can transform all those old Google Docs and Word docs and PDFs and spreadsheets and Google Sheets into dynamic, actionable recipes in Mies in lightning speed. Plus, stop all that manual work of processing invoices, because Mies will digitize all your purchases automatically. And there's a built-in database of ingredient yields, prep yields, and unit of measure conversions for every ingredient, which means you're going to get laser-accurate food costs in a fraction of the time. Visit www.getmeez.com. That's GETMEEZ.com to learn more. And check out the show notes moving forward, because we're going to be adding promotions and discount codes so that all of you lovely and brilliant Mies podcast listeners get a sweet deal on Mies. Yeah, I think it's crazy when people say, oh, we don't use recipes. That said, recipes are super important.
Absolutely.
But I think part of the recipe process is identifying what are all the things that might go wrong, even though we dialed this in. Yes, we have the exact amount of salt and sugar, but what if the bricks on this pear is different? What if the water content in this,
100%.
And just knowing those things so that when you're training them, they know what to look out for. I think that gets lost a lot in recipes. Talking a little bit about I'm so curious about your process in the company of R&D. First off, how do you get involved with that process?
Yeah.
And or is it just completely empowered to the team now? Or
that's a great question. So R&D to me is still obviously the most exciting part of, that will always be till the day I die. I think the most exciting part, right? It's very rewarding to make the perfect, foie gras terrine, right? Or something like that. But it's still so much, something that takes a lot of technique or whatever, but it's still so rewarding to create, and to innovate.
Yeah. Who's Adam Sobel?
So he is the head of all of R&D. He's a partner of mine in the company and works on all food concepts with me and creates, does a lot of the creation. So there's two chefs. There's Adam Sobel and Gerald Chen and Gerald runs all of culinary. And so the three of us will spend a lot of time. And then Veronica, my corporate pastry chef, will spend a lot of time on the R&D for a new concept. And so when we say, okay, so what we just launched, really, really fun restaurant, and it's called Orla. And what it is it's a lot of what I grew up eating, basically, because I'm Egyptian, born in Egypt, but Egyptian household, but honestly grew up in the United States since I was 2. And so a lot of what I grew up eating before I was a chef, I didn't realize how much Greek influence was in Egyptian food and vice versa. It was really fun process because just in the studies, we worked on this for about 3 or 4 years. It's my cookbook, my next cookbook that's coming out. But, as we spent more and more time in Egypt and kind of understood the influence from when Alexander the Great, when Egypt was invaded, and my father is from Alexandria and my mother was from Cairo. And so a lot of the food that I grew up eating had a lot of Greek influence in it. And it was, it's really funny to see kind of the crossover. And so the point of really the menu was saying, okay, we took this from all the way from food that, I grew up with, some of the staples, and then, put some product technique and innovation to them and created some really fun dishes to really celebrate some of the storytelling, but the Mediterranean flavor, that Eastern Mediterranean and Greek flavors that everyone loves so much and feels great when you eat it. And, and so it's been really fun, playing with these, these dishes that. To me, it's the funnest process. Fatir, it's this dough that's, this kind of a laminated dough that's made where you stretch the dough paper thin and you fold ash dough, which is kind of like a Middle Eastern sour cream.
Mm-hmm.
And sour
that
cream,
sounds good.
butter, and it makes this really light dough that I use my mom used to make like for breakfast where you pan fry it, and it's really not good for you, but, butter, powdered sugar on it. And so we do it with the ashta and the dough, and it's the most perfect dough it's the most perfect, base for caviar that you've ever had. Right.
Oh man, that sounds so good.
Yeah. And so like, my mom's falafel, we're doing with tahina, very classic, like salad beledi, which is like tomatoes, cucumbers, blah, blah, blah. But we're doing that. We do it with ahi tuna.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's cool.
Right. And so being able to be innovative like that. And so what we do is, we'll work on these dishes for a long time individually when we're launching a restaurant. And so we work on the dishes together, the culinary team, for the launch. And then we'll really take, wherever we're at, and we'll, localize it, obviously based on product, based on seasonality and whatnot. Then the way we work with the chef in the restaurant is part of that process. Really, like after that, the chef has the freedom to do their own tasting menus, do their own specials. And then as the menus change seasonally after that, then we start to work a lot more with the chef when the chef really has a good understanding of what the concept of the restaurant is.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Is there any process of collecting feedback, not from the independent of like collecting feedback from the chefs that are doing R&D with you? Do you have any way in which you're sort of intaking customer feedback? Do you launch it as a special first and then maybe it goes on the menu after that? And how are you collecting feedback?
For about 3 years, we had the Mina test kitchen. And what the Mina test kitchen was pre-COVID. So 3 years pre-COVID, what we did is we took a lot of these concepts that we wanted to grow, and we had a 50-seat restaurant with a very little kitchen, which was kind of intentional, right? And so what we would do is we would sell tickets. We'd do it as a ticketed event. We'd sell tickets. And so let's say we wanted to do this concept. We actually did it. It was called Mediterranean. We did it. We'd always put like a little faux name to it, right?
Yeah.
So we called it Mediterranean. And so what we'll do is we'll do about 12 dishes. They're served family style. And we'll, for the most part, we would give you like 3 or 4 starters, 3 or 4 mid fish course, 3 or 4 meat course, 3 or 4 desserts, whatever it is, right? And then each month we'll run it for 3 months. And each month we would change the menu. And during that time, we'd collect all the data. We would ask guests, because we would actually discount, probably what it would normally be like once it became a restaurant. We'd discount it, but we would ask you to give feedback. We didn't force you to, but everyone did it for the most part, honestly. We get feedback. And then the biggest thing is we would watch ticket sales. Like we were so confident, maybe another word for it, but we're so confident we were already out looking for the space, right? And the menu was phenomenal. What Raj Par, who's, amazing sommelier, it was a lot of his mom's recipes.
Oh, wow. That's cool.
And he's a chef. He went to culinary school and he had a really great chef that he was really close friends with and did a great menus the whole time, everything else. And I was like, oh man, this is just going to blow up. And it did blow up right at the beginning, but it was amazing. Like the sales kind of continually, the ticket sales.
Was it elevated? Was it was it more street food or more like sort of an elevated approach?
No, it wasn't super elevated at all. It was like street is like family food, like what you would eat at the table. Thought that we had a real home run. And honestly, even myself, I caught myself where I kind of only went like once or twice or 3 times. And I love the food, but I attributed it to it was kind of like Thanksgiving. I want it once or twice a year, but I don't think I want it every day. Right. Whereas Mediterranean or when we did Little Italy or things like that, I probably went 10 times.
Yeah, the American palate isn't really, it's tough. We experienced that at, tabla, where like when you have that much spice and heat or acid, it's a lot. And if you're not used to it, it's not part of your daily diet.
Right. Yeah, that's what I found. And so that was really for us, that was a great way to test concepts. And we ended up with multiple concepts. And so we really have just been opening. We're just now at the point like Orla was the last of those. And there's one more that we had tested that we still have to open. And so we still haven't really gotten into the market for a new concept. But as far as testing dishes, what we do with that is we do them in the restaurants. And so like chefs will run special, like if they really want to put a dish on the menu, they run it for a minimum of 3 days, because you know how chefs are. Like you might love it the first day, like it the second day, and hate it by the third day, right?
Yeah.
You know, they run
or it's impossible to pick up and you didn't realize it. Yeah, I'm looking at your menus and I definitely see like sprinkling of, I'm seeing tamarind and things in there. So you definitely, it's sprinkling in there. But I don't know if you can answer this. It's a tough question, but like, when does a dish feel done? Where you're like, okay, in the books, I don't have to iterate on that anymore.
It's really interesting because some dishes feel done. Sometimes you'll put that last garnish on there and you're like, this is done. And it's done forever. And then there's other dishes that throughout a year, you'll tweak and then they'll get exactly to where you want them, And I don't think that there is for me, there has never been an exact science for how, is it done or not? It's like the dishes that are classics, from tuna tartare to caviar parfait to lobster pot pie. Those dishes evolved over a period of time, all three of them,
Yeah.
And when is a dish really done? Honestly, is when it goes on the road and all of a sudden it becomes a classic. And then that's kind of when you can't touch it that much after that.
Yeah. Yeah. That's not an easy thing to create those dishes. You think about scale a lot. And I guess to your point, it's a little bit different when you have one-off concepts where you don't have 12 of the same concept, that you have to do that in different places, different altitudes, different equipment. But like, at what point does the scalability of a dish come into play when you're creating the food? Because, to sort of wind you up a little bit, obviously, even if it's not a dish that you have to do in 15 different locations, I mean, you have to execute it every day, the same way in a station, and has to, be something you can do with 500 covers or 100 covers.
Right.
When does that piece of the puzzle come into the R&D for you?
A lot of it does depend on the kitchen itself, the physical kitchen, the physical layout of the kitchen. And, as crazy as this is, it depends a lot on the consistency of the business, right? So when I look at dishes and I look at, can I put the resources towards a certain dish that I really want to put towards it? It's really the restaurants that have the more consistent business. It doesn't matter to me as much if you're doing 180 covers or 80 covers, but if you're built to do 80 and you're doing 80 every day, or if you're built to do 180 and you're doing 180 every day, now I can put the resources towards that dish, whether it's, I've had dishes where it's your whole station, that one dish, that's all you do is that dish.
Now you're talking Bouley. I have nightmares about 15 pans.
Yeah, but it worked, right? It worked. That dish, the dish made that statement. It was defined the restaurant. There was a reason that it was worth putting all that into, right? And to me, it's a science of how do you build a whole menu, not how do you do the one dish? Because there might be that dish, but then you also have to think about, well, how do I make this killer salt-baked sea bream that actually you do nothing on the pickup besides throw it in the oven, right?
Yeah.
To balance it out, right? And so it's all about how you do the whole menu, not just the one dish. I think that's something that in your younger days is hard, to understand. And that's where I think the R&D process is really important, is because if you're working as a team and you've got chefs, that's why I love when people are running specials and stuff like that, because within your own restaurant, you'll start to see really cool technique that you didn't know about, right? And that technique might be something that ultimately creates a great dish that is we always call it front loaded or back loaded. If it's front loaded and a lot of the mise en place is up front and you still get the wow factor, then you can do something that's heavier back loaded.
I do a lot, not even just in food, to be honest with you, in any industry, but we are pretty much, limited in how innovative we can be relative to how much people will pay for something. To your point of resources, right? Like you could probably take that dish and do way more, but you can't, right? Because people won't pay the amount of resources it would take to make that.
Right.
Do you ever think about a restaurant or something one day where you're like, you know what, this is just going to be, I'm going ham. I'm going to do everything exactly the way, and we're going to charge what we need to charge, and so be it.
I do. Obviously, we all do. We all want that. But I still would say that overall, I get more satisfaction out of being at a restaurant that has a great feeling to it in the dining room where like people are really enjoying themselves and people are really having a great time. And it's not that every single person has to come there to worship the food, you know?
Yeah.
I don't mind the person that has, you know, that will come in and have a perfectly cooked piece of chicken or whatever. And as long as they're having a great time, you know, as long as it's like, if they're mad at the world because they have to eat that piece of chicken, then it's not as much fun. But as long as like, you know, to me, so much of it is about creating and having, you know, restaurants where you're like, people go there and they're getting a wow experience and they're wowed by what it's doing. And it's not like, I'm not looking to build the club restaurants. It's not that, but it's that feeling of like, you know, I feel great. Like, I don't feel like this is a whisper joint. I don't feel like I have to whisper. I don't feel like I had to come here to worship the food. And if I don't know everything about the food, then I feel out of place, you know?
Yeah, no, I totally agree. You know, it takes a while to understand and admit this, but great service can solve a lot of problems. You know, there's a lot of meals that are delicious, but, you know, and some are better than others. But if you have, first of all, if you have really bad service, it could ruin everything. But when you have incredible service, and that can solve a lot of the, you know, of the sort of downstream things about the food. And it's tough to admit that, but it's true.
Yeah. Well, it's like I've got my Giovanni, right? And my Giovanni is just amazing. He's the dining room, you know, guru. And, you know, why does the dish taste so much better when he talks about it? And he could be anything. Like, he could be wrong about 50% of the ingredients, and it's still going to taste better when he talks to you about it. Because Giovanni just has this magic about how he talks about this dish and everything else.
Yeah.
And I think it's really true.
Yeah, it really is. And the overall experience, you know? I mean, look, there's just not a place where all you do is close your eyes and eat the food and that's all you need. That doesn't exist. You know, it seems like something that you clearly understand as you're building all these concepts. It's everything. It's the whole package together.
Yeah.
So I want to sort of move on a little bit from we were talking about R&D for a while, but you have to have learned a lot. I'm sure you also made a bunch of mistakes, you know, along the way of like how you're leading this team. But how do you handle big mistakes that your direct team makes, like leadership folks? Like, do you have any sort of way in which or any frameworks of like when a big mistake is made, what you do?
You know, like I said earlier, like, you know, you made mistakes on even wrong concept, wrong place, right? And that's a big mistake. And that's something that you're going to be fighting the whole time that restaurant is there. And that's probably one of the things that's the hardest to deal with, is knowing that you probably should close this restaurant or reconcept it. You know, it's either a bad location or whatever. And that's a big mistake, right? That's going to be a very costly mistake. And it's not just costly financially, it's costly emotionally, you know, and that emotional investment that you make into a restaurant, and when it doesn't work it's personal. It's personal. And I think in, you know, the younger years, you'll keep fighting and keep trying to push the rock up the hill. And you finally start to realize that you're neglecting a lot of other things to do that, you know? And I think that's the balancing act of what am I going to neglect for what I'm going to do, you know?
Yeah.
In our business, like in a lot of businesses, but in our business especially, there's only 48 hours in the day, right? So, you know, you're already working twice as hard each hour, you know?
Yeah. If you had to think like, what's the biggest mistake you've made? And maybe like what good came from that over the last, 30 years? Is there anything that comes to mind?
I think probably the biggest mistake I made was we did a concept in San Francisco, and it was called International Smoke. And I did it with Aisha Curry, and just great person, and really was we did it in the test kitchen, and I mean, this thing sold out in like 18 minutes, right? It's barbecue from all over the world. Aisha's, kind of her background, ethnicity, everything is the way her style of cooking, everything about it was cool, and it was great collaboration. We built the first one in San Francisco, massive home run, right? Massive home run. Went out and built 3 more. Went out and signed 3 leases, built 3 more. Learned a couple things real quick. Number one, you don't open in Houston right after the Warriors knock the Rockets out of the playoffs. Right?
Ah.
People take sports a lot more serious than they take food. And so we had about, I don't know, 250 Yelp reviews before we opened about rats running through the dining room. And we hadn't even opened yet. But number two was, we just grew it way too fast. Like we thought we had something on our hands, and we got careless. Honestly, we got careless with growing it too fast and not building that foundation that you got to build. And I think that it was hard. The company has had to fight really hard to rebuild from that. But the reality of it is we learned a tremendous amount because it is a mistake we don't make now. It's like now, when you build something and you really, you want to put that time, effort into really fully developing the concept and fully vetting it out.
Yeah. That's a big one. How do you think about the difference between you today as a leader and maybe as a chef, but more so as a leader versus who you were 10, 20, 30 years ago? Like, what's the biggest difference?
Well, I mean, look, I think that, obviously our industry continues to change, which is great. I think it was important that it did change. I think that a lot of us, grew up being part of an industry that ran a lot different than it's running today. And I think that being able to really look at today and say, okay, how are you to make sure that people are getting the information that they need the right way? And how do we continue to do that? And how do I let go of really the control that you kind of feel like you need to have? You feel like you need to be a control freak. And then how do you balance the amount of control that you need to have? Because I think that you can go too far the other way too, where you become too hands off. And I think that, that's probably the thing that I've learned the most is like, how do you feel confident enough in what your knowledge to where you can step in at the right times versus, I think, either step in all the time or don't step in at all.
Yeah.
And
that's the hardest thing, man. It really is. Like, how do you help people feel autonomous, but still the thing that made your business what it is part of you? And how do you make sure that doesn't, it's so hard, right?
Yeah, because there's a lot of politics behind it.
Mm-hmm.
You have to be patient. And I think patience is something that you have to grow into in this business because you're asked, so much pressure is put on you that it's hard to find that patience. And of course, like a lot of people, I look back and I wish that I had had more patience earlier. And it's still a constant battle. I mean, 100 tickets come in your printer and you got to keep working on how do you find that patience through it the right way.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, selfishly, I just want to know, and I apologize, I don't know about Bourbon Steak, but it's opening in my town. Can you tell me a little bit about the concept and when it's planned? Obviously, we don't know exactly when, but when it's opening in New York?
End of March, early April is when we'll open. And it's at the Essex House and we'll be right on that Central Park side. Who did the design based out of
cool.
Great designers.
Yeah, great designers.
Love them. And, Bourbon Steak, as funny as it is, like everybody thinks it's bourbon and steak, but bourbon, the name came, it's 20, I did the first one 20 years ago. The name came from actually Bourbon Stockyard in Chicago, which was the first stockyard in the United States. And so that's where the name came from.
Funny.
We've always been, like early on, it was about, now you see a lot of steakhouses, but when we did it early on, it was really about, product and technique, bringing that to a steakhouse, but still modernizing it, but still keeping what makes a steakhouse feel great. And I really felt like, as I traveled the world at that time, the US, 20 years ago was kind of known for, when people you'd go and they would say, Western on the menus, right? And the menu, that was always the steak part of the menus. And that's kind of what all those, when you'd see these international menus, that's kind of what we were known for, right? And so it's like, okay, well, how do we up our game? If we're going to be known for that, well, how do we up our game? How do we really take really fun plays on classic dishes, whatever it is? How do we up our game with technique? And so started really just experimenting a lot with how to cook steak and how to really have a lot of fun cooking steak. And not that we cook them all this way, but started using the sous vide machines, the circulators underneath big giant butter baths to hold butter temperature and then slow poach in butter and then go on to a 900-degree wood burning grill. And so kind of reverse cooking as opposed to grilling something, throwing it in the oven where the juice is all leaking out of it. And, the butter doesn't saturate the meat at all, but it just kind of seals it. And so it was a really great, interesting technique that really, as we were tasting, it was like, wow, this is really game changing. And so that's kind of what the foundation of it was built around. And then having fun, like the first thing you get is, when you sit down, your amuse is, duck fat fries, 3 different duck fat fries, nice. 3 different things, 3 different sauces. And so it was like break the formality right away.
Yeah.
And then take what is the perfect twice stuffed potato? What is the perfect broccoli and cheddar cheese souffle? How do you create these side dishes that are like this? How do you create great fish dishes that feel like they belong in a steakhouse? Then and never lose the essence of a steakhouse, but really take it and elevate it in a way in which you're going to get the things that you love when you go to a steakhouse, but you're really focusing in on product, technique, and some innovation, a little bit of showmanship, a little bit of tableside, a little bit of showmanship. This one will be the first one that will be that'll have a little bit more of a supper club feel. Great lounge, great, probably, live music a few days a week. And that kind of
nice.
That little bit of that feel to it as well.
That's cool.
And so I'm really looking forward to this one. I feel like this is the new wave of bourbon steak.
Yeah. I have a few questions to follow up with that. But first, what do you do with the butter after you poach the?
No, you strain it. Honestly, you'll use it for 2 or 3 days. It gets a lot of flavor.
Yeah. Do you use it for anything else after that? Can you use it to emulsify things, or is it just done after?
Yeah, you can use it. You can make yourself a nice Wagyu hollandaise if you want.
That sounds awesome. New York's it's such a different beast. I have to imagine, one, you probably did a tour of all the Lugers and the Keens and the...
Sure.
But what were you most concerned about? And what is something that maybe that you had to change a bit with the concept specifically because of New York?
Well, obviously, it's extremely competitive, New York. You have amazing restaurants, but you also have really good clientele.
Mm-hmm.
That's that balancing act, right? That you're going to balance. And I feel good about how long I waited for multiple reasons. I feel good because I have a great customer base that eats in my restaurants everywhere else that live in New York. And so I think that to me, that is really important. I have so much respect for so many of the chefs in New York because those are the people that I idolized, John George, Danielle, Eric, Repair. Unfortunately, some of the people that we just talked about that passed away. And so that would be both my concern and my motivation to go to New York is like, I've become close with all of them over the years, but I want to have a restaurant in the city that they're in and want to have a restaurant where they would want to come and eat and, everything else. And so I think that there's that, and obviously the fear is there and it's real about the fact that even though I cooked in New York and have a lot of ties to New York, that's not where I live. So that also plays into it, even though got a great chef. I don't know if you know Bradley Ogden, who was...
Oh, yeah. Wow.
Son, Brian Ogden, is going to be the chef. And so he's been
that's cool.
Many years. And he's going to, it's really going to be about him. And he is going to do an amazing job. He worked for me at Aqua. Really talented chef, very knowledgeable, great technique, but very knowledgeable when it comes to product. And I think this concept as a product is very, very important. So I feel really good about a lot of this, but then it's New York. So, bring me back in 9 months and we'll see, hopefully
I think avant-garde concepts are really tough to move to New York. Like if you move like on a Linea or something, it's like, there's not a lot of like patience for that in New York or time, by the way. But I think that this concept, the approach you have to steakhouse, I think it's going to crush it. Also in that area, there's not a lot of that type of restaurant around there. So I think you should crush it.
I feel like, if we keep it, we don't go overboard with a massive menu. We keep it to where people feel comfortable and, that way you can change with all the seasonal product and everything, but people don't feel overwhelmed when they come in.
Yeah.
And it's important to me, I think, as I've seen steakhouses evolve, even though they're called steakhouses, you think of the amount of great, like you've already got this, this incredible wood burning grill that you've invested so much in this day and age to put a hood in for it, and this Jasper oven and all this, so you can cook, delicious fish that it's simply prepared.
Yeah. The thing with steakhouses is like, they're also kind of celebratory. That location where you're at, is like you're going to get all the Midtown and the finance folks that like do the expense dinners, but then you also have like Upper West Side, Upper East Side that come down. Mm-hmm. So I think it's also a great location because there's not, most of them for some reason are actually farther downtown. There's a couple up there, but I think it's also a really good location for it. I'm excited to see it. I'm excited to check it out when we open. I'll bring my wife there. She loves steak. We're sort of wrapping up here. Yep. Like, I don't know if you think about this, like Mina Group 10 years from now, what do you see as like the biggest change, if anything?
Yeah, I mean, I think that as we continue to grow, I think that you'll see more Adam's getting a concept within Mina Group that is an Italian concept, Lunara, that he's doing. Gerald is going to has a concept within Mina Group. I want to continue to do more of that. I want to continue to see, that's what I want to see the company become as I, frankly, get older. I mean, no other way to really say it, right? I mean, we've seen what's happened of late to people and everything else. And it's really important. I think that to me, that's always been one of the funner things to do is like, let people use the machine to build their, build themselves. And so if I could see any change, Daniela, who's my chef in San Francisco, she's just amazing. She wants to do a Colombian concept and she's been pitching me, and I want to see that come to life. She cooks some amazing food, They
have so much good. Have you been to like Bogota or that area?
Yeah. And
so much good food there.
Yeah. I mean, that would be a dream come true. Like to see the company go forward and have some of these people that have been an intricate part of this company be able to develop some concepts that are theirs.
Obviously, now it just seems like you're at a point in your career where the success for you, or the feeling of success, is when you see these other folks that have been with you for so long start to be really, successful on their own as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it was great. Great to meet you. And, to finally meet you. We hadn't met before, so this was awesome.
I really enjoyed it.
Thanks for tuning into the Mies podcast. The music from the show is a remix of the song Art Mirror by an old friend, hip-hop artist, Fresh Daily. For show notes and more, visit getmees.com/podcast. That's GETMEEZ.com/podcast. If you enjoyed the show, I'd love it if you can share it with fellow entrepreneurs and culinary pros, and give us a 5-star rating wherever you listen to your podcasts. Keep innovating, don't settle, make today a little bit better than yesterday, and remember, it's impossible for us to learn what we think we already know. See you next time.